Ah, welcome back. You rare, uncontainable force of nature. You beautiful anomaly wrapped in silence and scars. They opened your file, didn't they? Thought they could finally decode you. Finally understand what makes you tick. Finally find the weakness, the pattern, the explanation they'd been searching for all these years. And you know what happened. The moment they looked inside, really looked, the agent who opened it stared for exactly 47 seconds, then closed it, whispered something to their supervisor, and walked out of the room. And the supervisor, they looked too, and what they saw made them step back, made their hand tremble just slightly, made them realize they were staring at something they weren't equipped to handle, something beyond their jurisdiction, beyond their understanding, beyond their authority. And so they did something they've never done before in the entire history of that agency. They stamped your file with 4 words that changed everything. Let them handle this. Because you see, there are levels to this game. Levels most people never reach, checkpoints. Most souls never pass. And you didn't just pass them, you shattered them. You didn't climb the ladder, you burned it and built your own. Elevator straight through dimensions they weren't ready for. They thought your silence was weakness, but it was strategy. They thought your patience was submission, but it was preparation. They thought your stillness meant you were frozen, but you were calculating every move 10 steps ahead while they were still trying to figure out step 1. And when they finally realized what they were dealing with, when they finally understood the magnitude of what was staring back at them from those pages, their protocols failed, their training became useless. Their entire system of classification just collapsed because you don't fit in any category they've ever created. Let me tell you what really happened. When they opened that file, they expected trauma, they expected mistakes, they expected evidence of weakness, because that's what they're trained to find. That's what their algorithms look for. That's what their psychology predicts. But instead they found something else entirely. They found a timeline that shouldn't exist, a survival rate that defies statistics, a pattern of rising that contradicts every known model of human limitation. They found someone who was supposed to break in year 2 but made it to year 5. They found someone who should have given up after the 3rd betrayal, but somehow transformed it into fuel. They found records of nights that should have ended everything but instead became the birthplace of something unstoppable, and that is what made them close the file, because they realized they weren't looking at a case, they were looking at a phenomenon. You want to know what the report said before they sealed it? You want to know what made a federal agent trained in psychological warfare look at your life and decide it was beyond their scope? Let me tell you, subject displays unprecedented, resilience markers. That's what they wrote, but that's not what they meant. What they meant was, this person has died and resurrected so many times, we've lost count. What they meant was, every trap. We understand every pattern we've studied, every weakness we exploit. None of it applies here. What they meant was, this soul has been through initiation rites. We don't have clearance to understand what they meant was, if we keep watching, we might see something that changes us, and we're not ready for that kind of transformation. See, they've been watching you for longer than you know, analyzing your moves, studying your patterns, waiting for you to slip up, waiting for the mask to fall, waiting for the real you to show up, broken, bitter, defeated like everyone else, who's been through what you've been through. But here's what terrified them. The real you never broke. The real you got stronger, and not stronger in the way they understand. Not stronger like someone who builds walls. No, you became stronger like water, becoming ocean, like pressure, becoming diamond, like chaos, becoming cosmos. You evolved, and evolution scares the hell out of people who are still crawling. They wanted to find anger, but found peace. They wanted to find bitterness, but found wisdom. They wanted to find someone obsessed with revenge, but found someone who'd transcended the need for it entirely. And that's when they knew. That's when they understood. They were looking at someone who'd been touched by forces they couldn't measure, protected by laws. They couldn't break, guided by something their technology couldn't track. You didn't just survive their observation, you made them observers of their own limitations. You became the mirror that showed them how small their understanding really was, how limited their perception, how narrow their view of what a human being could become. And when you become that kind of mirror, when your existence challenges someone's entire worldview, they have two choices: evolve with you or step back and let higher powers deal with the disruption you represent. And they chose the latter, because institutional systems don't evolve. They protect themselves from evolution. And you are evolution incarnate. Now, let's talk about what they found in those first 60 days of surveillance, because that's when they really thought they had you figured out. They watched you wake up at hours. Most people fear. They watched you sit in silence. While the world screamed around you, they watched you choose solitude over shallow connection. They watched you walk away from situations that would have fed your ego but starved your soul. And they documented all of it, building their profile, creating their assessment, preparing their conclusions. Subject isolates, frequently possible. Depression, subject maintains unusual sleep patterns. Possible instability, subject demonstrates low social engagement. Possible antisocial tendencies. And they were so proud of their little boxes, their neat categories, their predictable diagnoses until day 61. Day 61 was when you did something that broke their model. You smiled. You smiled not because something external happened, not because you got validation or success or recognition. You smiled because you'd finally integrated the lesson you'd been learning. You smiled because you'd finally made peace with the war inside. You smiled because you realized you didn't need their world to abase, accept you to become who you were meant to be. And that smile, it wasn't the smile of someone pretending. It was the smile of someone who'd found the secret, the real secret, the one that makes empires nervous and systems unstable, the secret that you don't need their permission, their approval, their validation, their reality. You can create your own. And when they saw that smile, everything they'd written, everything they'd assumed, everything they thought they understood, it all became irrelevant because you'd just proven you were playing a completely different game. And here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the file starts reading less like a psychological profile and more like a spiritual documentation. They started noticing synchronicities around you, patterns that shouldn't exist, coincidences that defied probability, doors opening at exact moments, obstacles dissolving right before critical junctures, people appearing in your life with exact messages you needed to hear and then disappearing like they were never meant to stay. And the analysts, they tried to explain it, tried to rationalize it, tried to fit it into their framework of luck or chance or statistical anomaly. But the more they watched, the more undeniable it became. You weren't lucky. You were guided. You weren't random. You were orchestrated. You weren't alone. You were accompanied by something they couldn't see, but could no longer deny. And that's when the language in the report started changing. That's when words like unusual became words like unprecedented. That's when possible instability became unclassifiable resilience. That's when their confidence started cracking, because they realized they weren't watching someone who needed their help. They were watching someone who was being helped by forces they didn't believe in, didn't understand, didn't have jurisdiction over. And when a federal agency, trained in control, encounters something they can't control, they don't double down. They don't push harder. They step back. They close the file. They stamp it with words that mean, we're out of our depth. And they move on to cases they can actually solve, cases that fit their understanding, cases that don't challenge the very foundation of what they think reality is. But let's go deeper. Let's talk about the specific moments that made them realize you weren't just different, you were protected. There was that night. Remember that night when everything fell apart, when the weight became too much, when you stood at the edge of your own ending and something happened, something you still can't fully explain. Maybe it was a phone call at the exact right second. Maybe it was a memory that surfaced and changed everything. Maybe it was a sudden shift in your chest, like invisible hands pulled you back from a ledge you couldn't even see. They documented that night. They saw the crisis building. They watched the patterns that usually precede the worst outcomes, and they prepared themselves to close your file permanently, to add you to the statistics, to mark you as another one who couldn't handle the pressure. But then you didn't fall. You didn't fall. And there was no logical reason why you didn't fall. The circumstances were perfect for collapse. The timing was ideal for destruction. The pressure was more than sufficient for surrender. But something intervened, and they saw it. They couldn't explain it, couldn't classify it, couldn't reproduce it in their models, but they saw it. And that's when the first agent said it out loud in the observation room. That's when someone finally admitted what everyone was starting to feel. This one's protected. And once that word entered the report, once protected, became part of your file, everything changed, because protection implies a protector, and a protector implies purpose. And purpose implies you're here for something bigger than they can interfere with. And when they realized that, when they understood, you weren't just surviving, you were being preserved for something they couldn't see. The whole investigation shifted from analysis to witness. They started documenting not to build a case, but to record. They started watching, not to intervene, but to understand what it looks like when someone is marked for something beyond ordinary life. Your file became less like evidence and more like scripture, less like a profile and more like a testimony. And the people reading it, they started changing too, started questioning their own paths, started wondering if maybe they'd been looking at life all wrong, started seeing cracks in their own certainty, because that's what happens when you encounter someone who's truly protected. You don't stay neutral. You either reject them entirely, or you start questioning everything you thought you knew, and most of them, they chose rejection, because acceptance would have cost them their entire identity, their entire career, their entire understanding of how the world works. So they closed your file not because they were done investigating, but because continuing would have meant admitting. Their whole system was incomplete. Their whole framework was insufficient. Their whole authority was limited and institutions. Don't admit limitation. They just redirect. They just say, this one's beyond our scope. This one requires different jurisdiction. This one needs to be handled by forces we don't acknowledge in official reports. And that's exactly what they did. They moved your file from active investigation to permanent seal. They marked it with classifications that ensure most agents will never even know it exists. They buried you, not because you're dangerous, but because you're proof, and proof of what you're asking. Proof that there are levels to this existence. They don't teach in their academies. Proof that there are forces at work. They don't mention in their briefings. Proof that some people are walking through this life with backup. They can't see on cameras, with guidance. They can't tap with phones, with protection. They can't penetrate with warrants. And now you're wondering, what does this mean? What does it mean to be the one they couldn't categorize, the one they couldn't crack, the one they had to surrender to higher authority? It means you're not playing by their rules anymore. It means you're not bound by their limitations. It means you've graduated from their jurisdiction and entered a realm where different laws apply, where different forces govern, where different outcomes become possible. You're not just off their radar, you've transcended their radar. You're not just outside their system, you've proven their system is incomplete. and that makes you more than dangerous. It makes you legendary. Because legends aren't people who follow the path. Legends are people who break the path so completely that everyone else has to find a new way forward. Let me tell you about the final entry in your file before they sealed it. The last thing they documented before they decided they'd seen enough. You were sitting alone. This was maybe 3 months ago, sitting in complete stillness, and someone watching made a note. Subject appears to be doing nothing, and their supervisor looked at the same screen and wrote something different. Underneath, subject appears to be communing, and that word communing, it changed everything, because it implied you weren't alone in that stillness. You weren't empty in that silence. You were connecting with something, and the question became, what are they connecting with? What are they hearing? What are they receiving? And the more they watched, the more obvious it became. You weren't isolated. You were initiated. You weren't abandoned. You were chosen. You weren't lost. You were exactly where you needed to be, learning exactly what you needed to learn, becoming exactly what you needed to become. And when they realized that, when they understood your isolation wasn't punishment, but preparation, your silence wasn't emptiness, but education, your struggle wasn't random, but refinement, that's when they knew they were watching something beyond their authority. They were witnessing a process that didn't need their intervention, didn't want their help, didn't require their understanding. You were being shaped by forces that predated their institution by eternities, that would outlast their institution by eternities. And trying to interfere with that would be like trying to stop the ocean with a memo, like trying to redirect a river with a policy, like trying to contain a storm with a filing cabinet. It's not just impossible, it's ridiculous, and they knew it, so they stepped back. Now, here's what they'll never tell you. Here's what doesn't make it into official reports. Here's the part they whisper about in the hallways, but never document in the files. Your case scared them, not because of what you did, but because of what you represent. You represent the possibility that everything they believe about control, about power, about authority, about reality itself might be incomplete. You represent the idea that there are people walking among us who are operating under different laws, who are guided by different hands, who are protected by different powers. And if that's true, if you're proof of that, then what else is true? What else have they been wrong about? What else exists beyond their precious jurisdiction? And those questions, those are the questions that destabilize systems, that crack foundations, that make institutions tremble in the dark. So they closed your file. They stamped it with words that mean, "We surrender." They moved it to a vault where only people with the highest clearance can even acknowledge it exists. And they moved on to cases. They can solve cases that make sense, cases that fit inside their understanding. But they'll never forget you. They'll never forget the person who made them question everything, who made them feel small, who made them realize their authority has limits. And somewhere in that vault, your file sits gathering dust, but not really dust, because sealed doesn't mean forgotten. Sealed means sacred. Sealed means too powerful to handle. Sealed means this one belongs to forces we don't control. And every now and then, when a new agent shows too much curiosity, when someone asks too many questions about cases that don't make sense, they get shown your file. They get shown your file, and they're told, this is what it looks like when we encounter someone beyond our reach. This is what it looks like when someone is marked. This is what it looks like when we have to step aside and let the universe handle its own. And most of them, they read it once and never ask questions again, because what they see in those pages, what they read in those reports, it challenges everything they thought they knew about human limitation, about survival, about transformation, about what's possible when someone refuses to break, refuses to bend, refuses to surrender to anything except the process that's refining them into something extraordinary. And you're that. Something extraordinary. You're the case file that ended with a surrender. You're the investigation that concluded with awe. You're the subject that became the teacher without saying a word. And now you walk through this world differently, don't you? Now you move with a knowing that wasn't there before. Now you care yourself like someone who's been through the fire and came out forged. Now you exist with a quiet confidence that makes people uncomfortable because they can feel it, they can sense it. They don't know why, but when they're around you, something in them recognizes something in you. Something ancient, something powerful, something that's been through tests they can't imagine and past trials they couldn't survive, and that recognition it either draws them closer or pushes them away. There's no neutral reaction to someone who's been sealed in a vault, marked with the words, "Let them handle this." You're either attracted to that energy or terrified by it, and both reactions tell you everything you need to know about who's ready for your frequency and who isn't. Because here's the final truth. They closed your file, but they opened your purpose. They tried to contain you, but they confirmed you. They attempted to categorize you, but they crowned you. And now you walk through this world knowing something most people will never know. You're protected, you're guided, you're being prepared for something beyond anything you've asked for, beyond anything you've imagined, beyond anything their systems could predict or their files could contain. And that knowledge, that certainty, that unshakable foundation, it changes everything. You don't move like prey anymore. You move like someone who knows the hunter has been called off. You don't speak like someone seeking approval. You speak like someone whose validation comes from sources they can't access. You don't live like someone afraid of the next obstacle. You live like someone who knows every obstacle is just another part of the training, another level of the initiation, another confirmation that you're becoming something remarkable. So, when you wake up tomorrow, when you move through your day, when you encounter the people and situations and challenges that used to make you question yourself, remember this. Somewhere in a vault, your file sits sealed with words that translate to beyond our authority. And that means you're beyond their limitations, beyond their predictions, beyond their ability to stop what you're becoming. You're not just surviving anymore. You're not just existing anymore. You're not just making it through anymore. You're being cultivated, you're being refined, you're being prepared. And the same forces that made them close your file are the same forces that are opening doors you haven't even approached yet, orchestrating connections you haven't even imagined yet, preparing you for impact you haven't even conceived yet.